folks. I'm Laura Zarrow, and thanks for joining me today. How many of you have heard the notion diversity produces innovation? Right? Not an uncommon concept. But it's not that simple an equation. You don't just get diverse voices in the room and poof, innovation happens. We know that innovation can be elusive, innovation is complex. After all, I mean, look, we have an entire ecosystem that we're building together out here at the conference to try and scale innovation and make its impact, realized. But one of the things that we need to think about if we want innovation to be real is how we can create an ecosystem within our own organizations that gets us out of that overly simplistic equation of diversity equals innovation into thinking about it as an inclusion system, where inclusion is the thing that's going to bring us innovation, drive more inclusion, and continually propel our advancement in solving knotty problems in new and exciting ways. So I want to give you a little bit about me and where I work, because we have an ecosystem, so you can at least know how I'm grounded. I work at Wharton People Analytics. I'm the executive director there, and our whole mission is to try and figure out how we can advance evidence-based decision-making, how we can help individuals and organizations thrive together. Now, as a research center at a university, you'd think research is our primary activity. Shouldn't all things fuel that? But we don't think it's that simple or linear. All of our research is done in practice with organizations, partly because we want to solve real problems and we need real data, but also because our goal is to advance the practice of people analytics and put it to work to help those organizations thrive more effectively. At the same time, we're an educational organization. We care deeply about our responsibility to educate the next generation of leaders. So in our ecosystem, education is a pivotal component. We want to take what we learn in those organizations, with those organizations, bring it back into our classrooms, but at the same time, we want those students to go out and be leaders, be leading new researchers, and be leaders in those organizations who understand that analytics is a way of knowing that can shape how you run the organization. But if our real goal is to advance the practice of people analytics, that's about a community. It's our community of educators. It's our community of practitioners. It's our partners. And the more that we contribute to this ecosystem, the more that we activate these centers of energy, the more that community grows, the more our impact grows. So now take a leap of faith with me. I want to talk about how we bring this to the way we bring talent into our own organizations and ignite it. Now, as I think you may know, I do a radio show on women at work. We do a lot of work on diversity. And one of the things that we keep talking about is what women can do to change the game. Today, I want to talk about what the organization can do to help bring women in, and in fact, all underrepresented groups. This applies across the board, even though there's some gender-specific stuff in here for sure. So when we're recruiting talent, one of the things that we need to start with is diversity from the get-go. Have any of you read Iris Bonet's book? I highly recommend it, and at the end, the last slide is going to be a series of books that I recommend for you guys. She's a behavioral scientist at Harvard who has done the research to show us that we can engineer search processes so that they are less biased. We can engineer our way around our biases and have more productive search outcomes. So the first step is we got to have diverse search committees. For those of us that work in hierarchical organizations, or whether it's a startup with a small team where everybody's included, who's in the room, who's at the table when you're designing a position? Whose voices are heard there? Are you getting perspective from all aspects of the organization, from the industry? What can you do from the get-go? Get some new people to contribute to the way that position is described. Think about how you scrub the position description. I can't recommend Textio highly enough to make sure that when you're presenting a description, an ad, it is neutralized. It emphasizes what you're looking for without making it alienate the talent you're hoping to draw. Then the next thing is to really make sure you blind your resumes. Don't cheat. Don't look people up on LinkedIn. Don't find out that you know that you're meeting with the data analyst from company X. I'm going to go look up company X online. Go into your search, into your review process really blind. You'll be amazed at how different the results are. And the other thing, and Iris Bonet talks about this a lot, is how you can engineer your interviews. I think in my time, particularly in higher ed, I've interviewed hundreds of people in searches for deans and presidents and provosts. And I've been amazed at the organizations I've been in and others to see how casual, in a way, search processes are. How many times I sit down with a team of people who, they're all asking me questions, but they're actually talking about themselves more than they're talking about, you know, what they want to learn from me, or they're making up their questions on the spot, or they're sorting them out as they come out. And be disciplined in your search processes. Use good behavioral science. Figure out what you're trying to find out. Ask questions that are going to yield the information that will help you make an informed decision. Decide who's asking the questions. Ask them the same way every time. Ask them in a well-constructed setting where every candidate gets the same amount of time to interview. Make it fair. Give everyone an even chance, and it becomes more diagnostic. And then the last thing is to remember about the context in which people come to interview. You are recruiting. You want to attract these people. There was an amazing study that looked at where women who were, young women who were poised for tremendous success in STEM fields, when did they start falling through the holes in the leaky pipeline? What was one of the first holes that they encountered? And it is easily summed up as the Star Wars posters. They walked into the computer science labs, and the walls looked like a teenage boy's bedroom. And they immediately got the sense that this wasn't a place for them. So take a look at your own environments. Does it look like a teenage boy's fantasy bedroom? How would you feel if your mother came in? How would you feel if your sister came in? Would you be embarrassed? Those are huge clues. But you really want to look around and see, am I messaging that everyone can be comfortable here? And this isn't overly inclined to make one portion of my population happy. Okay, so now let's talk about you've recruited them. You've put a lot of energy into getting good talent to come and be part of your organization, and particularly women. Now, one of the things that often happens is assumptions are made. The assumption that only women need flex time, it's a policy, let's just make sure we have a good policy and we'll attract them. And those policies may be how much maternity leave you get, but it should also include how much flex time you get. Working Mother magazine did an amazing report of the 100 best law firms to work at, and what they found hands down was that the law firms where they gave not just leave time, but flex time, and the senior partners took it, had the most women employed for the longest period of time, rising to the highest ranks in the organization. If you can give and take your flex time, you're accomplishing several things. You're making it more possible for people, women, to integrate work and their personal lives. But you're also recognizing that parenthood is not the only thing that constructs your personal life. Whether or not somebody is a parent, they're caring for an older parent themselves, or they want to become a triathlete. Those are all things that matter to them that actually enrich them. So the other thing to think about is how you go about creating an environment where, as people are having these experiences, particularly new parents, how do they come back into your workplace? Lauren Smith Brody just recently put out, actually it came out a year ago, it just came out in paper book, a great book called The Fifth Trimester. How many of you are parents? Okay, so for those of you who are parents, I think about the first 12 weeks after my daughter was born, and it was like she was so vulnerable, she did not belong outside my body, and you're just figuring out how to function. Well, Lauren, I think very wisely and creatively noted that at the end of that 12-week period, there's actually another transformation period, the fifth trimester, and it's when the working mother is born. It's when most of us have to go back to work. It's when we re-enter our workplaces, and our workplaces welcome us back after the most transformative experience in our lives. If we can look at that time like we do orientation of a new employee, we invest in their successful transition back in, we will do a lot to do two things: help get that employee back in the groove quickly and successfully, and send the message to them that we value the fact that they've become a parent. Too often, organizations think parenting is going to make somebody, it's going to split their focus. It's going to make them less ambitious. It's going to make them soft. What we find is that, particularly with women, our ambition is our ambition. It doesn't go away just because we brought new life into this world or because we love more people. And we also find statistically that women actually become even better managers of their own time. And their records of success do not diminish as they enter parenthood. What does happen, though, is that women will not only leave the workforce, but they will leave your workplace. They will become flight risks if you don't help them get through this period of time successfully. And if what you're doing is trying to bring in the best talent possible and you're making an investment in them, then make the investment in keeping them. And the other thing is to remember, no mommy track. And mommy track is not a good thing, unless you want to be mommy tracked, which I don't think most ambitious women do. Don't presume, once again, that women's ambitions have changed or they won't perform for you. Give them every chance you would give everybody else. If a woman needs to back off, she wants to back off, then she'll say that. You know, she's the one who can turn down the promotion, turn down the overseas assignment. But give her the chance, because she's the same talent. She's just now more experienced and has an additional dimension to bring to her work in the organization. Then the next thing to think about is what's the context in which we work together so we can develop that talent, so we can put it to use and have it actually fuel our innovative processes. So, you know, we talk about how do we start kids off right. We think a lot about the classroom. We think about how we measure the success of women in the workplace, what's happening in the boardroom. Yet we spend most of our lives in the conference room, in meeting spaces, working together. And we know that it's in that environment that's where a whole other set of holes get poked into that pipeline, where the way that we work together can silence women, ignore women, bully women, or any other underrepresented group. So one of the places where you should be vigilant about creating fair and balanced discourse, respect for each other, is in that work environment. And because so many of us are attached to education, think of it like a classroom. Make sure there's a leader. Make sure you hear every voice. Make sure you're involving everybody. Make sure that you don't have the students sitting in the back corner or the woman in the back chair behind the conference table. Get everybody up to the table and make sure their voices are heard. And we're going to talk in a little while about some amazing resources that are there for you, including Jennifer Riel's book, and Jennifer's here, on integrative thinking, which is a way to really activate that conference room. Then there's the studio. I come from an art school background, and there's a couple of paradigms that are essential to how art school delivers an education that's actually behind design thinking. It's the studio environment, and it's the critique. The environment in which creative people are placed in order to maximize their creative development does a couple of things. It gives them space and tools, but it lets them decide how to use them. And it lets them work privately. Idea generation is done independently. Everyone may be prompted with an assignment, but the students work individually on idea generation. Whether it's the development of a design solution, or I remember the first day of my industrial design class, everybody, you have an hour, come up with 100 things to do with a brick. Whether or not it's ridiculous, whether or not it's practical. I want you to sit down alone and come up with ideas. And from that moment on, what I saw and what's been proven out in the way original ideas form and groupthink is prevented, that you must create alone to not have your creativity squashed. Then the group comes together and can evaluate those ideas. But the critique process in the studio gives us another paradigm for how do we evaluate each other's work. In art school, what it means is that every single student has to put their work up on the wall, sometimes several times a day. It's terrifying. And you have to explain to your peers and your teacher, what did I do and why? And then everybody in that room has an obligation to give you feedback on what worked, what didn't, how you could push it further. Good ideas that don't apply to the assignment are put over here for the time being. Bad ideas thrown away. And then the promising ideas are often totally reworked. But it's an ongoing iterative process where a structure allows feedback to be put to use. And then going again with our school metaphor, there's the playground. What do we do outside of our workplace environments? In school, our playgrounds are a place for kids to let off steam, get some exercise. You build friendships there. But also bet each and every one of you could think of some horrendous moment on the playground that you wish you could block from your memory. Those kinds of freewheeling environments where people's least guarded selves come out, and often most malicious, most emotionally driven, can be really damaging to the people who are out there playing. We know that life around work, not in the workplace, feels integral, it feels essential, but organizations have to stop creating out-of-work activities that make people feel either that they're joining in games that they are totally uncomfortable playing, that has to protect them from being put in the corners of that schoolyard where they can't be protected from the bullies, and it also needs to make sure that the girls and boys are not playing totally different games. Find a way to engage your employees, your team, so that everybody is involved. And also, don't make it required. Think about that kid in school who actually was more refreshed going to the art class or the library, or actually was doing an extra credit project. Let your employees decide how they're refreshed and how they want to bind. Create opportunities, but make sure they're not exclusionary. And then that brings us to, if we're creating this ecosystem, these different spheres of energy about how we recruit people, how we make sure we have the policies and practices that are going to retain and attract and retain that talent, and then we have ways of working together. What is it that's going to drive the innovation then? Then we have to come to the point when we're working together as teams in these settings to think about, where do we start? And what I see all too often with creative people is they start with the creative idea, but the creative idea was not designed to solve a problem or meet a need. And I think of that really as where the fork in the road is between creative and innovative. How can you harness creativity in order to make it applicable, in order to make it useful? And so part of it is you've got to start by articulating the problems that you want to solve. And then the next thing is you've really got to start thinking about, how do we generate ideas? How do we consider all of the possibilities that could solve this problem? Going back to, what's 100 things we could do with a brick? Even though the brick was really not the problem we were solving at the time. But part of what you learn when you go through an ideation process like that is that each of us will individually silence our creative voices. We'll come up with an idea and we'll say, oh, that's not good, I shouldn't share it. Oh no, he won't like that. Oh no, I don't know if that can work. That might be too complicated to implement. But if when we start with, okay, here's the problem we want to solve. Here's the tool we have to use. Here's the issue we want to address. Make that safe environment for generating ideas. The only way you fail in that context is not to generate ideas. They can be good, bad, crazy, practical. Don't judge them until they're all generated. Don't make the judging further silence the generation of ideas. Think of how hard you've worked in that ecosystem to get new voices onto your team, to help those new voices feel confident and stay, and give them arenas in which their voices can be heard. Now, it's time to do that. And if you want a roadmap for this, I'm telling you, integrative thinking, and Jennifer Riel's book translates it into the work environment in a beautifully clear way. But you can also think about it in less structured ways as, how do you make a safe place to use your imagination applied towards real problem solving? And then go through an iterative process of figuring out, how do you sort through the ideas? What's good, what needs development, back to that art school crit. Hold on to the unusually interesting things that may not be implementable. Analyze them based on the criteria that's necessary to bring your ideas to life, and recognize that that's how you're now fueling a process of ongoing innovation. And so when you connect these things together and you start to realize that how you recruit people, the tone you set in the very beginning of the process, sends a message. It doesn't just attract them, it communicates to them what your organizational values are. So how do you recruit them? How do you bring them in? How do you let them see how you make creative places, productive places for dialogue? What is your environment like in terms of creating a culture of support and respect for one another? How do you balance what goes on in the office and outside of the office? And how do your policies work to support both the points of entry and how they move through the organization? I want to make a particular point here as you're recruiting about the importance also of watching to make sure that as you create equal footing for everybody, intellectual equal footing, room to be creative, room to be mutually respected, you also need to create financial equal footing. And remember that coming in the door when people negotiate is an incredibly important time. Instead of watching just the bottom line and seeing how you can snag that talented individual, make sure that you're demonstrating that they're entering an ecosystem of respect by making it clear, particularly to women, whether or not that salary is negotiable. I know it can feel like a game. Well, maybe they won't negotiate. Maybe they won't negotiate too well. The bottom line will be okay. But what we see statistically is that women will not negotiate unless they feel the door is open. When they are told, go back, look at this number, let me know if you want to talk about it, they will negotiate as effectively as men. They will not overshoot, they will appropriately shoot, but you will have employees who felt like they were given their best shot at being on equal financial footing, avoiding a pay gap developing within your team later on. And so, as you think about this, think about how you can then lead this ecosystem into recruiting your next team. How can you identify what are the problems we're trying to solve with our next team? What are the possibilities and who could be a candidate? And what's our process for going through it? And hopefully, what this will lead you to is a whole ecosystem that generates inclusivity and generates the innovation that's going to maximize the impact of your organization. So now I have 4 minutes left. You guys have any questions? Oh, yes, very important. Okay, so one of the things I do for the radio show is I read a ton of books. Some I ask for, some are given to me. There's an exciting and slightly appalling business of advancing women in business. But I want to share these with you because I think these are exceptional. Alison Downey's book on Here's the Plan should be read by any woman ever thinking of having a baby and any employer who's interested in retaining those women. And the 5th trimester I mentioned before, it's actually becoming a movement. Lauren's work is really great. Iris Bonet's What Works will teach you how do you engineer equality within your organization, particularly in your search and evaluation processes. That's What She Said by Joanne Littman picks up where Lean In left off. Fueled by fantastic research. She's a Wall Street Journal reporter. She really talks about that ecosystem, but from the perspective of how do we behave individually. And Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, I feel like Kim in another life was in an art school studio. And it really talks about how one of the greatest forms of respect that we can give each other is honest and useful feedback, but given with respect. And then Creating Great Choices, Jennifer's book with Roger Martin. And The CEO Next Door is a really interesting book put out by Elena Botello and the team at GH Smart that after 20 years of collecting data on the selection of candidates for CEO roles and boards, took the analytics to break it down into 4 core behaviors that anybody can learn, that were evidenced in the CEOs who were most successful. And it really is eye-opening. Only one of the 4 attributes overlaps with what most search firms thought were the most important attributes. And the other thing is that recognizing that there are 7 million CEOs in this country, many of whom are here and running teams of 5 or 10 people as opposed to Fortune 500 companies, there's a lot to learn there. And then as a nod to my graphic design instructors, Ken Hebert wrote that book maybe 35 years ago, and it was called Universal Unique, and it was about the power of limiting the elements that we work with in order to maximize our creativity. There was an exhibit done at the time where they sent 40 designers a 40-inch square, a photograph of an eye, and the word word. They all got the same 3 ingredients, and then an exhibit was done of what everybody came up with. And it was mind-boggling how deeply personal and wildly unique each of those creations were. So as you're creating an ecosystem to foster innovation, support creativity, turn to the arts as an inspiration and a resource, and remember that there are all of these people out there who are producing really great guides for us so we can keep learning about how to do a better job with this. So thanks, everybody.